Welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Khaldor. So we came back from the clash in Korea, the Eastern Clash, and since then I was a little bit busy, so it took a bit of time to record the next interview. But today we're going to talk to Kure about North America as a region, about also his start with Heroes of the Storm, his beginnings in the esports scene of Heroes, especially with Heroes of the Dorm, and I'm going to hear his insights on especially like team changes, the way that those dynamics in the teams work. And outside of that, I also want to say thank you again very much to everyone who supports the interview series and all the content that I bring out on Patreon. We had a couple of people that actually started to support the show just recently. Thank you very much for that. It's highly appreciated. So guys, thanks a lot. And yeah, we're going to go straight to the interview now. Welcome everyone to the next episode of Coffee with Khaldor. We got the coffee here, so the normal setup, not the event setup that we had with Tetcher the last time. Was also a little bit since we had the last episode, and today we're gonna wander across the pond again and gonna go straight to North America. We have Q with us. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So there's a lot of things that I actually want to touch upon with you, not the least also a bit the North American Heroes of the Storm scene. But maybe before we head into all of that, I want to start a bit with how you actually started to be interested in esports in general. Were you always a PC gamer? Did you come more from the console perspective? I mean, you made your big splash in the competitive scene, at least to my knowledge, with Heroes of the Dawn. We're going to talk about that. But where are your roots?
Okay, so this is actually kind of a long story, but
Let's go.
I started gaming when really young because I had three older brothers, and I mean we had every game console, you name it, like PS2, Sega Dreamcast, GameCube. We used to play Super Smash Bros. All the time, and 64. And so basically Xbox was where I really started playing a lot of video games, specifically Halo 2, Call of Duty 2. And then Call of Duty 4, I actually lightly competed. There was this online ladder system called Game Battles, and I used to play a lot of like ladder events and tournaments. Like you would qualify for playoffs based off of how you did in league play. So I was familiar with that, and I was probably like 12 or 13 years old back then. And even moving into Modern Warfare 2, I even played with like scrimmed against some big name players like Nate Shot, Hastro. So back then I had like a little taste of it, but I mean, I was like a 13, 14-year-old kid at that point. So it wasn't anything serious to me, but I knew that it was something that existed, and I knew it was something that I was good at because I could compete at some level. And so always in the back of my head, any game I played, I always, had that sort of competitive mentality and drive.
I mean, out of curiosity, that bug, does it only catch you? Did it catch your brothers as well? Do you compete against them, or did they never take it that serious? How did that interaction go? And also, are they younger or older than you?
All three were older than me, so
Okay.
I was kind of like the baby. But no, I would always be the one who would stay on later, and even like I couldn't sleep at night, so I would like go sneak on the Xbox, and sometimes my dad would catch me or whatever. But I mean, a couple of my brothers, they definitely like we definitely had a bit of a competition going, especially the ones closer in age to me, and that kind of like bred that sort of mentality into me where I wanted to be better and I wanted to beat them. And then even past like the sibling rivalry, like I sort of always had that sort of ingrained into me from as young as like 12, 13.
Did you ever have a scenario where you wanted to play anything competitive online? You talked about the ladder system, and you had to want to beat one of your brothers off the console because they were trying to steal it away from you. Did that happen?
No, they were actually pretty supportive because I was already better than them back then, even though I was 2, 4 years younger than them. So they were pretty supportive of me, competing whatever in whatever way I could. And even now, they're still, supportive because they know that I've always had that sort of itching inside of me. So yeah, definitely supportive.
So you were talking about when you were like 12, 13 years old. Did that competitive drive in those games then subside until you went to college, or were there other games in between that you played?
No, I definitely, like focus on school. I mean, after Modern Warfare 2, I basically just said, okay, well, I mean, I'm starting high school now. I can't take games seriously. It was always like a sort of side hobby for me, and I kind of just put it to the back of my mind. Although I did, freshman year of high school, I discovered League of Legends, which was basically my introduction into PC gaming and introduction into MOBA games in general. And I was hooked right away. And basically throughout high school, all 4 years, on and off, so from 2011 to 2014, I played League, and I hit Challenger a couple of times. I hit. And, I mean, I was consistently master and Diamond 1 before that. So, and I played with some of the top pros as well, like Hot Shot or Dyrus or Double if you name it. So,
Hmm.
I mean, it was always, it was kind of like a repetition of how I saw the Call of Duty scene grow like in front of my eyes as a young kid, and seeing these big names now in games like Modern Warfare 3, like or like Nate Shot and Black Ops, how they just popped off. And so I was seeing the same thing in League, where some of these guys I played with, they're going pro and they're having their names on big posters. And but it was another thing where I just kind of I just like took it casually while I was in high school, and I was like, I'm not that serious about it. I'm just good, but casual type of good.
But when you saw names really like pop through that all of a sudden make it into that pro scene that you knew from playing with or against them, wasn't that already like, was there never a spark where you were already thinking about, okay, if they can make it, why did I not go there? Or can I maybe still catch up with them?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some sort of, maybe not even conscious, but some sort of like resentment based off, those two games where, but I still, I was a very, so I'd say I'm like a pretty one-track minded person where I focus on one thing very heavily. So at this point, I was really focused on my education and, obviously with my parents as well, like really ingrained that into me. So I always put education first, and I always just treated gaming as like a side thing. But then like seeing like LCS growing, or seeing like the Call of Duty scene growing, MLG, all that, like in the back of my head I was always like, well, I could have been doing that, but I should probably just focus on getting into a really good college and focusing on school, and worry about all that later.
And college is then when all that changed, right? And that came when Heroes of the Storm announced Heroes of the Dorm. Did you play the game before? Did you specifically start to play the game because of Dorm? Like, how was your start into Heroes?
No, I actually was asked by Huge and Cladius, two of my dorm teammates, to play Heroes of the Storm because they're familiar with me, because we all went to UTA together, and they knew that I was a really competitive League of Legends player. And basically, they said, "Hey, this game's kind of similar to League. We think you'd be really good. You should join our dorm team. This is a prize. You get full tuition." I'm like, full tuition for collegiate gaming. That sounds pretty interesting. So I tried it. They got me to try it out, and within a couple weeks we were already scrimming and practicing, so I jumped straight into it.
So first thought probably, where the hell are my items?
Yeah, I mean, I actually like pretty much hated it for the first like month or two, because like 5 years of League, you just feel like, oh, why isn't this more like League? Like, oh, where are my items? Where am I? Why can't I one shot people, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I definitely like didn't like it at first, but sort of grew into it.
Now, I'm pretty familiar with exactly that feeling because, I mean, coming from Warcraft 3 originally, I of course played Dota, and then when Dota 2 came out, I played that a lot. So when Heroes came over, I tried it in Alpha, and my first thing was also like, experiences shared, where are my items, what are these talents? So it gets you a little bit until you get used to it, but then I kind of get hooked. But talk to me a little bit about your experience with Dom. The first time that you guys tried, you didn't make it all the way, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And how did that transfer over then into trying it again and also starting to become more competitive on Hero League, where you made a huge name for yourself?
Yeah, so even throughout the first storm, I'd only been playing for a couple months at that point, but just the overall experience, I would definitely say that's what inspired me to become a competitive player. Because, like I said, I was familiar with competitive gaming. I was familiar with, the perks of it, or just, like I knew what it was, but I had never experienced it firsthand. And that dorm specifically, they flew us out to Seattle. We were right next to the baseball stadium. There's like big posters. They had us like, everything like really fancy hotel. They even were filming a documentary, so they had like camera crews on us. And so all of a sudden, I was thrust into this sort of like taste of like, the competitive game lifestyle, and even like playing on stage and having that sort of rush and energy. Like there's nothing that compares to that, first time. And as soon as even though, yeah, we did lose to ASU in the finals, like as soon as I stepped off that stage, I knew that like this is what I wanted. And so from that point onward, as soon as I got home, I just started grinding, and I still haven't stopped.
This might be a dumb question for me to ask, but why Heroes? Because at that point, when you lose the tournament, and you said you had a huge League of Legends background, and that at the beginning of the game you really needed to get used to it. But at that point, you could have just reflected on yourself and said, okay, I really love this competitive angle. I really want to be on the stage again. but I'm going to do it with a game that I played for 5 years. So why did you decide to stick with Heroes of the Storm instead of going, so to say, back to your roots and just continue the League of Legends path?
Yeah, so for League, I had some experience with scrimming with some amateur teams, and I never really liked the competitive aspect of League compared to HOTS. Like when we started scrimming HOTS, it was actually like just as fun as playing ladder play, right? Whereas in League, when you scrim it, the games were a lot slower. There was a lot more going on in terms of like slow map pressure, and like to me, it was just overall like a lot more boring. Whereas HOTS, it was like in your face. There's a lot of like important team play, and it was just something that hooked me right away in terms of like play style, and also like something I could see myself, because like when you're talking about, so for League I played casually, like I said, where I would play maybe a few hours a day if anything, but for HOTS, or for being a competitive gamer, you have to like spam it, right? And I could not see myself, putting in that much time into League spamming, even though I did play it, pretty much on and off for 5 years. I couldn't see myself embracing that sort of competitive lifestyle.
It's actually really interesting because I had a similar experience with Overwatch when the game came out. I mean, from me, not really from the player perspective, but from the casting angle. When there's a new competitive game coming out, I usually try it a little bit and see, okay, do I like it or not? And with Overwatch, I had pretty much the same experience that you had in that sense. I loved casting the game for like a couple of games. I mean, we're talking alpha here, obviously. So I casted a couple of those games for YouTube and it was a lot of fun. But compared to Heroes, I could totally not see myself do that over the duration of a weekend, like over and over and over again. That game just didn't catch me the same way that Heroes, for example, did. So those few were the only ones that I ever did there. So I get that. So the action aspect really catches you. You start playing Hero League and you absolutely nail it there. You had 4 accounts in the top 10 at one point in North America, made a huge name for yourself and became, even before you start with HGC, already that superstar figure that everyone is looking up to. And then you go into Dom again the year after. How did what changed in that 1 year from you personally, the way you played, the way you approached the game, and the way you also interacted with the community?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, I'm a one-track minded person, right? And so basically, from the moment we lost, in 2016, I made it my goal to win in 2017, and also a big, motivating factor for me was getting that tuition, because again, I still like thought to myself, well, if I'm pursuing this competitive aspect, what am I getting from it, right? And so for me, it was like the big scholarship. Like even though I can set my sights on winning this and put all this time into the game, at least I'm getting, maybe I can go back to school now with, all this tuition money and scholarship. So I still had like a goal at the end of it, right?
Sorry to interrupt you, but what did you actually study?
I was studying political science with a minor in pre-law, and my goal was to go to law school.
Okay, and that was something that you could only achieve through winning Dom? Was that the goal that you, or was it just like something, the cherry on top of it, getting the free tuition there?
Yeah, no, it was just, I mean, I definitely was doing it on my own, and I was already a junior, so about a year from graduation, but it just felt like I was justifying putting so much time into the game by getting, the tuition, like the cherry on top, like you said.
Okay, so then you compete again, and at that point, you guys make it all the way, you win. And I would expect that from just you in that time period between the 2 tournaments, like grinding and experience the competitive level more, that also the structure and the way that you interacted with your teammates changed a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I took it very seriously, and even now I look back on it and I think, man, I was probably a little too harsh, in terms of like I was very much a perfectionist, and I took it like very, very seriously. Yeah.
Did the team change? Did you compete with the same players, or did the team change, and if so, why?
Yeah, so Kevin and Toby, they were also going to UTA at the same time, and so we held tryouts for those 2 spots that were previously occupied by Mist and DXN. And Mist, he took a break from UTA to focus on streaming, so we need to fill a spot anyways. And then DXN, he was kind of like me, where he didn't really play HOTS as his main game, and he kind of just took it up for Dorm, but after Dorm, he wasn't really, that inspired, like as inspired as I was to keep going. So we basically had to fill 2 spots, and the Ebros came in. We tried him out, and yeah, so it was huge, Cladius, I, and the Ebros, yeah.
Lead me a little bit through that second tournament. What was like? How was that as an experience for you? Were there any big teams as obstacles for you that you really struggled against? Was that just a smooth run? And also, how did the team interaction go with you probably providing most of the experience here when it came to understanding the game at that point, at least?
Yeah, I was pretty stressed because of the amount of time I put in to grind the game and to try to win. Because to me, it was kind of all or nothing. You know, like the only way I could justify putting in the amount of time I did was to win the tournament. So I was pretty worried about some of my rivals, more specifically LSU, who had Draded, who's as you know, he's a pro player now on Team Octalysis, and they were also they had a couple former competitive players like Haas as well, who was on imported support with Traded as well. So that was the team I was definitely most worried about, and they talked a lot of trash. And even when we played them, the games were kind of close during the TESPA training grounds, which was like a precursor to Dorm. So I definitely put in a ton of work, and I was really worried. Even leading up to the final day when we played them, we ended up winning 3-0. So maybe I was a little over prepared, but I mean, I really wanted the hard work to pay off.
You talked a bit about justifying the amount of time that you spent into the game, and that the only way for you to do that was by winning the tournament. Justifying the time to yourself, or was it also something where your brothers and your parents at that point in time started chipping in and said like, "Hey, you're like spending tons of time right now preparing for this. Are you sure that's really worth it?"
I'd say it was more for myself. My parents have always trusted, me in terms of what I do in my own time. And I was still going to university full time as well, taking 15 credit hours and trying to juggle it all. I lost a lot of sleep during those 6 months leading up to the tournament, and it was just a really stressful time. And so it was more for myself of kind of like proving to myself that, that this endeavor was worth it, and that I didn't just waste, all this time. Because to me, it was really like this is wasted if you don't win it. So I was pretty hard on myself during that time period, and I learned a lot of valuable lessons as well about like balancing my time and making sure I don't fall into that rabbit hole again.
So then you win the tournament, but you don't let it go. How did that happen?
So even after winning the tournament, I wasn't sure if, like I said beforehand, that I was pretty certain that I would go back to school after, and I was kind of justifying it to myself as a worth my time, right? Because so even
Sorry,
after, sorry, go
like
ahead.
clarify that for me for a second. You said you're going back to school after. I assume that's going back to university, so you did take a break, or
No,
how
no,
did
no,
it?
sorry. Well, there's summer break, right? So basically, I had like 3 months to decide whether I'm gonna take a break from school and pursue HGC, or
Okay.
if I'm gonna go back to school for the next year, right? I
Okay.
guess I should have clarified. Yeah. So basically, even like leading up to the tournament, I was still mentally deciding a bit, but I'd mostly decided that again, like competitive gaming, it's not for me. I should just finish school and take the tuition money and run with it, right? But after we won Dorm and lifting up that trophy and seeing the impact I had, and also just knowing how good I was as well. Like at the time, I think I was very, very good. I mean, I still think I'm really good, but at the time compared to the talent pool, I think I was extremely good. So leading into the HGC season, I decided that what, I'm gonna try it out for one phase and see how it goes.
But that also meant that you had to go the prize money from Dorm Go, right? Or when did that kick in?
So basically, I was allowed to hold it for a year. So I actually had to give it up recently for this specific phase. So I still had a year. So it was low risk in terms of I could try a phase or two and see how I liked it. And then I had to decide to give up the tuition or not.
And from the university's perspective, you are able, like again, I'm not really 100% familiar with the system in the US, but you are able to just take a huge break, and if at any point now you wanted to go back, you could.
Yeah, I'm on a leave of absence. It depends on your school, but generally most schools will hold your credits, and you'll be able to go back after a break. I'm still on a leave of absence from my school. I'll probably have to withdraw soon, but yeah, I will have no problem going back and finishing. But yeah, the tuition is gone from dorm.
Yeah, you said you had 1 year left, right?
No, I had 1 year of leeway, and it's been a year now, so I had to give up the scholarship.
No, no, I meant like how much do you have left? If you
Oh,
decide to
sorry,
go,
school. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I have 1 year of school left. Yeah.
okay, 1 year out of how many?
out of four.
out of four. So definitely something that with the single-mindedness that you talked about earlier, you could complete, have also that safety net there if you feel that esports
Yeah,
isn't going anywhere in, let's say, the long run, like 10 years from now for you.
yeah, I could definitely go back and finish.
So at this point, what's your outlook? Or, well, like what? I mean, we're going to talk about HGC a bit more and also about your teams there. But right now, what kind of state are you in when you're looking towards your future? Is it something where you say, okay, esports is a like a dream for me that lasts a certain amount of time but has an end date at some point when I have to go back and finish university and then take a different job? Or is it something that you want to pursue in the long run where you say, okay, this is something that I want to do for as long as I can, even when I'm not a player anymore, I'm trying to branch out, become a coach, become a consultant in a company that deals with esport, what have you? I mean, there's a ton of options. So where's your mindset right now when it comes to that?
So what I've been doing and my mindset has stayed consistent is basically after each phase of HGC, I during the off season, I examine everything, the opportunity cost of me playing another phase in terms of, what if I graduate already, what would I be doing right now? And then also like what would happen if I went back and graduate right now in terms of like, let's say I went back, took a year off from HGC or from esports, finished school. If I came back, where would I be at, right? So basically, I've just been putting it out of mind during the phase, and then during that off season, each off season, I examine, whether it's still worth it for me and whether I should keep pursuing it. And currently, I'm still pretty motivated to keep playing in the HGC and continue with esports. So for the foreseeable future, I don't see myself stopping.
Was it ever an option for you to try and do both at the same time? And I mean, obviously, you would have not as much time to practice anymore, but to try and complete university while you're still playing in HGC, was that ever a thought process, or do you feel that splitting your time in that way would not help you with either?
I think it's technically possible, but I don't think that for myself it would be a good idea because, like I said, during my dorm days, it's something I did where I kept going to school full time. And I think even part time, I think it would be too difficult to juggle. And I think I would suffer in both aspects, my grades and also my performance in the HGC. And I wouldn't even want to do that to my team because this is a full-time job and it's something you should take seriously and grind. So I wouldn't even want to do that, to my team.
So let's talk a bit about your journey in HGC. So you come from Dorm, and at that point, you're basically hailed as the Heroes Messiah of North America, the one to save them all. Multiple accounts in the top 10 continuously. You just win Dorm. Everybody is just like sitting there. It's like cure, cure, cure. How do you deal with that pressure? I mean, you must read that on social media, on Reddit, and first of all, how do you make sure that doesn't get to you where all of a sudden you believe in everything and say like, oh my God, I'm the greatest of all times? And second of all, how do you deal with those expectations towards you when you enter the professional scene?
As far as dealing with it, I never really took it that seriously. And maybe this is something that helped me from my league days where I would talk to some of my pro player friends and they'd be like, yeah, all of this is not true. And I kind of like was like that, like almost like a third person spectator of that sort of thing in the league community where I knew that like it's all like noise, so it was never something that really affected me. I mean, I have my own standards for myself that I still have that, that you can't touch those. So I never had any issues with pressure or anything like that.
How do you perceive your HCC career for now? I mean, you were in Freedom and you guys had a lot of success. You guys went also to China, but then of course roster swaps are starting to come through. And from that point on, one could argue that you, like from the way that I perceive you, you're someone that really just like aims for the top continuously. You talked about the single-mindedness earlier, where you say, okay, I'm going to focus all my energy onto one goal. And it seems that after 2017, things don't really run the way that you were probably envisioning them. So can you talk a little bit about like 17, first of all, after you finished Dorm, and then how that transitioned into the situation you're in right now with Endemic, where you guys are aiming for the playoffs?
Yeah, so for me, it was kind of the reverse, the trajectory that I expected, where I expected to start off really slow and then rep my way up. Whereas on Freedom, it was a team that, I mean, it wasn't my first choice, if I'm being honest with you, right? And they were fifth place when I joined. and right away we're really good and we qualified for the first Western Clash. I did not expect that at all, right? And I believe it was August 2017 Kiev. I had been playing pro for like 2 months. I'd been playing the game itself not for very long compared to everyone else who was at that event. So for me, it exceeded all my expectations. And then qualifying for BlizzCon after that, that was huge. HGC finals of 2017. So for me, my goals were, start off slow and work my way up, right? Whereas, like you said, it's kind of gone the opposite way, where I qualified for every event, or I played in every event that NA was eligible for, all the way up until MSB. So now MSB and this Western Clash are the first two events that I haven't played at that NA's been eligible at. So it's definitely been, a challenge for me to like kind of accept that and realize, that just because I didn't qualify, like I'm trying to like think of, what my 2017 self would think. Like, hey, it's not the end of the world, because I was already expecting that, if that makes sense.
So, what do you attribute that to? Is that just bad luck at some point? Is that just that the teams that you guys were forming didn't quite work out? And if so, if you can talk about it, why is that? I mean, it's not always about just like, I feel synergy in this game is more important for team members than a lot of people realize and understand, and that oftentimes it's not just simply pointing out, okay, maybe one player in a team doesn't have the mechanical skills from the personal experience that I look to, and a lot of the teams that I talk to, that's rarely the case. Oftentimes it's more so that the persons don't properly mesh together. Is that a reason why some of the projects where you were on, or some teams that were you on, were not really running that well? And yeah, can you talk about that maybe a little bit? Where you think this is going for you right now? If Endemic is the team, if you feel that in the future that some things have to change, do you have to change as a player, for example? We're always talking about players taking more responsibility sometimes, being more active as a shot caller, drafting. Is that something you pick up, like all these general things?
So I'd say for Team 12 Octalysis, it was definitely one of the cases where we maybe set too high expectations for ourselves, and we also had, several issues in terms of conflicting personalities, etc. But I mean, it was also a little bit of bad luck because we did qualify for Western Clash and did decently there, the one in Katowice in April, and we were one map away from qualifying for MSB, which we lost to Heroes 3-2 in the playoffs. So I would still look at that roster as a success. I mean, only two NA teams could go, and we're still a top three team. So I don't think it's anything to scoff at. But I think that was definitely a team that I took the most lessons from in terms of making sure that I'm a player that's easy to work with, making sure that my mindset is similar to that of my team, and that I can work together with my team. I think a lot of like interpersonal issues develop on that team, and it's something that I'm a lot more mindful of now because we were all really talented and we definitely had the skill, but we could never really translate it.
So you talked a bit about the experience going to those events. Like, just a pure curiosity, when you traveled to Kiev, was that the first time for you in Europe? And also, how did the experience being on the international stage now, how did that change things for you? Did it change anything at all, or was it very reminiscent of your experience with Dome?
No, yeah, that was my first time in Europe, and it was definitely eye-opening for me. That tournament was actually probably the worst tournament I've ever played, and that was the tournament where I had all the hype as well leading up, and I guess I did buy into the hype a bit because even like the EU players were like hyping me up. They're like, Kure's the best player in NA, and I was so cocky leading up to it, and I absolutely got dumpstered by Fnatic that tournament. I remember thinking like, man, this is a whole nother level. I mean, but that whole experience for me was so positive in terms of realizing that it's not just about NA, and think outside your bubble for once in terms of how good you think you are, like how good you still have to be, right? So I think that definitely helped me a lot with making sure I never had an ego, and even like talking to the European players and understanding their mindset, and also like just seeing a whole nother perspective from a different side of HGC that I hadn't before. I think it definitely helped me a lot in developing as a player.
It's actually something I'm really curious about because we're talking a lot about the international events being a chance for the metas to go up against each other. And obviously, as a player, your first focus is your own region so that you see, okay, what works within my own region? What's the current meta here? How much do you look towards other regions, being it Europe, being it Korea, and what they play? and how much do you try to incorporate that in your own scrims? And did the amount of how much you do that change after, like before and after the tournaments on the international stage that you played?
I'd say even back then, people were definitely copying, like especially NA. Like NA was kind of known for copying Korea the most, and that started even back with like the Naventic Bob Ross days, where they would incorporate a lot of Korean elements in their drafts. So I think even back then, teams were copying like Korean and European drafts, and even still now, like it happens all the time. But I think the difference is that going to an actual event, you can see like how they're playing it, and you can talk to them about why they're playing it, and then you can have, instead of just like going on Master League and being like, oh, what did Dig run yesterday? Let's run it, right? You can actually like understand, and a lot of it is just like hero pools, or like it's like a response to their own meta. So I think you kind of have to take it with like a grain of salt in terms of just copy pasting it. So yeah.
You talk about like talking to players from other regions. If you would have to name one or two, who are the players in either Korea or Europe that you are the closest to and talk to the most frequently?
It's pretty much the whole Dignitas squad, I'd say, especially Snitch, Wabi, Poik. I talk to them a lot, like just talking about meta, or talking about, being a pro player and stuff like that. Those are definitely three of my closest European friends. Mene as well, really nice guy.
Now, talking a little bit about the current situation that you're in with Endemic, what are you doing for the team? Do you only play? Do you have an influence when it comes to shot calling? Do you have an impact on the draft? Do you draft for the team or share your opinions there? Talk to me a little bit about what your responsibilities within the team are at this point.
So originally I was drafting when we first started. Now Dansky's drafting with sort of like a team element involved. As far as calling, I definitely. So we had originally Dansky as the main shot caller, but we sort of realized that it has to be more of a team-based effort. So Dansky is still the final say, but all of us are active in making calls, especially myself and Michael.
You said that originally you were drafting and now he's drafting. Was that because, why did that happen? Was that too much of stress? Did you figure out that your way to approach the draft was that his was just better, or was that change made?
I think part of it was just our inner team dynamic, where when I was drafting, I think perhaps I shut down ideas too much, or maybe people were hesitant to speak their ideas, whereas Dansky, I think, is a lot more open and vocal to ideas. And I also think when he's drafting, we're a lot more involved, especially like, so if I'm drafting, I'm always there doing everything, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if he's drafting, he's always there and I'm always there, right? So we kind of had like a dual approach more so than a single approach. And I think it helped everyone get involved when we swapped over. So I mean, and also I was a bit stressed out as well when I was drafting. So I think it was overall a really positive change for the team.
I mean, normally we're trying to avoid like a little bit the things that are happening right now, since a lot of that stuff usually like ages not too well. But there's something that I'm really curious about, and that's where do you see the team go? Because you guys had just 2 weeks ago really good results, and you had a role swap coming in for Michael, and you immediately, I think you 3-0'd. And then the next week you have, unfortunately, two sub players coming in, and obviously the team can't perform on the same level with last minute changes there. But right now, me personally, and I think a lot of other people are asking themselves, where's Endemic going? How much potential do you feel that the current team has, especially with regards to BlizzCon? And yeah, where do you see that team just like ending?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in a good place right now. Obviously, the setback from, our last week, which was a bit disastrous, with Udall having the injury and B-Kid having family issues. So, I mean, that was definitely a big setback, but I definitely think this roster still has a ton of potential. And I think we've, tackled one of the biggest issues that I've personally experienced on my former teams, which is like the interpersonal side, right? I think we've definitely done really well on that end, and I think the rest just comes like the synergy, play, talent. I think it all comes with it, and I think you could look to our 3-0 versus Team Freedom, as an example of that. And as far as BlizzCon, I think we have a pretty decent shot. I mean, obviously from the fifth place standing, it's kind of hard to say that we're a favorite at this point, and especially with the way I think NA as a whole has improved a ton this entire year, and it's definitely showing in our international results as well. Tempo being fourth place at MSB, Freedom third at Western, and taking so many series off EU as a whole. So I'd say NA is the most competitive it's ever been, which it's definitely showing in our results. But I'd say we still have a pretty good shot.
So, would you still say that even with the recent changes that we saw, with Sam leaving and now focusing on trying to become a pro within Fortnite, with Arthelon also turning away from Heroes Hearth, which definitely hurt the ambitions of that team a bit, uh, they just won against Lactalysis, so they're still on the trajectory to BlizzCon. But would you say that even with those changes to the top teams in North America, the North American region is more competitive within the region and also on the international stage? Or do you feel that those two leaving have hurt NA a lot?
I think it's definitely a major setback. I'd say more so the Psalm leaving, because I think Psalm was definitely like one of the brightest minds in NA, and he definitely led by example. And I'd point to him as well as myself and the former Team Freedom roster, as we're sort of the ones to sort of usher in this new era of like grinding and taking it seriously. Like Psalm, Fan, like that Tempo roster, our old Freedom roster, like we really like led by example in terms of like showing that NA does have a chance and NA can compete and taking it seriously, because I think way back 2015 2016 that was not the case, and I think losing Psalm was a huge setback for sure. But I think losing Arthelon, in my opinion, I mean, I obviously don't know the dynamic of that team, but I think that they already had a structure in place, which is really good. They're leading the front on that in terms of having a really impactful coach in Cawthon Luck and having a really good system in place. So I think for them it'll be a lot easier, and it's already shown in them beating Octalysis with the replacing Arthelon. So although I do think that these are setbacks, I still think that NA as a whole is still looking a lot better.
Where do you see North America? Like, how competitive do you think is BlizzCon going to be from a regional perspective? I mean, we're always looking towards Korea, obviously. Gen.G is looking fantastic, even though they now in the Korean region have actually dropped a few maps. Dignitas is completely dominating Europe, so we have like two super teams, so to say, at the top of those regions, whereas the regions themselves are also very competitive. Europe maybe even a little bit more than Korea, but where do you see North America when we're talking about BlizzCon?
I mean, obviously it's hard to say, but based on what I've seen, like you said, Dignitas and Gen.G, they're on a whole nother level. And I think outside of that, it's an even playing field. And that even showed at Western Clash with, Freedom beating Leftovers, Liquid going down early. Even in our Western Clash, all the way back in April, our Team 12, we took down Method 2-0. So I think, I mean, not to like just brag about that, but I think overall it's a lot more competitive, and I think outside of those two teams, it's going to be anyone's game.
So one question that I still have in terms of roster changes is there's always the talk about why do they change a roster? They should just like try as 5-man to gain more synergy. Obviously, for viewers in particular, it's oftentimes very difficult to look in from the outside and realize that there might be some personal differences that are very difficult to bridge. But what's your personal take on roster changes that we see? Let's focus on North America here, since I assume you're most familiar with that, even though you said you talk a lot to Dignitas and others when we have changes there. But in North America, do you feel like that criticism is justified, that that people are too quick to change out players when they don't feel the success is there and should stick more into improving as a unit? Or do you feel that most of the changes that came in the past were from a point where people realized, okay, this is not working as a 5-man, we have to make a change either because of individual skill or because of synergy within the 5-man?
No, I think it's definitely not justified. I mean, for us, for all these players, we take it very seriously and professionally in terms of, understanding that for the next 4 months is going to be a roster. Do you really think you compete, right? And especially coming from NA, which is, as you said, a weaker region. I think anything you can do to make yourself more competitive, whether it's roster changes, whether it's fixing, whatever issues you have, I think you should definitely go for it. Especially, with the roster change rules we have right now, where, like I said, you're locked in for 4 months. So I definitely think that all these roster changes that we've been making, I think it's definitely been helping the region out more than it's been hurting.
Okay, when we're talking about roster changes, another point that oftentimes comes up is that it's very difficult as a player that is outside of the HGC system to make themselves known. And I think some of the avenues that you can take are, of course, always finding an open division team, but not everybody is very driven in that sense. So do you feel like teams in general should look more outside of that HGC complex and more looking towards the ladder? And then also, of course, the question that comes with it immediately, do you feel like the ladder is a good enough representation of skill that you can actually draw conclusions from what you see there?
I think definitely teams should be looking more towards picking up open division players. I think there's so much untapped talent in the open division, and especially recently, this past season, I think has been the best ever in terms of amateur talent. And I mean, it's shown even with some of the recent pickups, like Vin, for example, on Tempo Storm. That team was still a top 3 team in NA with a brand new player who's never even he wasn't even on like a top 2 open team. So they're like that's proof itself. So I think a lot of these lower tier teams, they should definitely be looking outside of the few pros that have been a staple for so long, and maybe try something new, shake things up. I think even like LFM, picking up Droplets and now Dark Chimera, I think they look way better now, picking up 2 fresh blood players rather than the meme is like recycling old pros. And as much as I hate to see people talking down on pros like that, there is a point to that when you're looking at teams that are consistently 7th, 8th, 6th place for shaking things up. I think yeah, absolutely, we should shake things up more.
I mean, one of the arguments that would be made in defending that recycling that you talk about is that if there's actual players that are strong enough to take those pros down, they should be able, through the open division, to come into the Crucible and then win that match. And there's a bit of a counter argument that goes that the added stress that you have when you're not familiar with that HGC environment, and if you don't have regular access to HGC scrims, there's still a gap that you can't just bridge by simply playing open division. You need more time within the realm of possibility to get HGC scrims on top of it to actually get there. What's your take on that? Do you feel that the open division and the Crucible is, as a mechanism, good enough to challenge those teams that only get 7th, 8th place continuously, or do you feel that if you can't make it through the Crucible as an open division team, then obviously the players that are still in HGC defending their spots are better and therefore deserve these spots?
I think it's definitely a complex issue because it isn't a perfect system because of several things. One thing I would point to would be the fact that there were HGC teams who they had players unfortunately leave during the season who then picked up, like for instance Jin off No Tomorrow is the first one that comes to mind, where Jason left in the middle of the season and Jin was on I believe the number 1 or number 2 open team, and they picked him up to replace Jason, and that team never looked the same, right? And that may have been a team that could have qualified. So I think like that, I guess poaching, I wouldn't say it's poaching, but just an unfortunate circumstance to where it's hard to just say that, oh, just win the Crucible when you're not playing in a perfect environment. And there's also, these teams don't form the best rosters, in my opinion, all the time because they don't really have any sort of like regulation. They don't have salaries. They can't convince players to stay on their team. They can't build that synergy. They're not really making the money for that. They don't have coaches really. And then there's also the fact that Crucible is played on the server, which is something that's always complained about of the HGC team, right? So if you have an open team of really talented players who are all from the East Coast US, they all have to play on Hyping. So there's that argument as well. I do think that generally speaking, strong Crucible teams will win, and I do think that this season I fully expect Scythe Esports to win. I think they're the strongest open team that's ever existed, and I think this trend will continue, and that the top open team will likely keep making it in, at least in my opinion. Yeah.
So when you talk about Crucible, is there any way that you personally think the system should be changed, could be changed to make it better, or do you feel that even with the downsides of the system that you just talked about, it's still the best system that we can put in place there?
I mean, I think with the current parameters, it is the best system we have because the HGC teams do need to have that advantage, in my opinion. I think obviously the easy thing to point to would be to make it on LAN, and I do hope that that does happen in the future, and I couldn't see anything but that happening
Now,
to fix it.
one of the coming from the European angle, I rarely consider the server issues as much as I should. But even on the European side, one of the things that I personally thought about in the past, I mean, again, we don't have that. I don't see it coming anytime soon. But one of the possible solutions to take maybe some of the anxiety away that teams experience playing in an HGC setup for the first time in the Crucible and playing worse because of it would be, instead of playing one best of seven, playing two best of fives on 2 consecutive days, and then just mesh those results up against each other, and the team that has the better overall score advances, and if it ends up in a tie, you have one map that decides it all. Would that be something that you think would even be advantageous, considering that in North America it would also mean you can switch servers if that is actually a problem?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be something that could be trialed. I mean, yeah, I could see that working for sure.
Okay, coming back to another point, you talked about poaching or taking a player from an open division team into HGC. What's actually your thought on that? Because I'm always a little bit torn myself. On the one hand, I can understand the thought process of that an HGC team that needs a player can't approach an open division team. At the same time, you have now a situation where, let's say, Heroes Hearth, for example, they lose a player and they're not allowed to approach the top open division teams to get a player there. On the one hand, it feels like it's a good solution since it keeps the five-man together within the open division. And then on the other hand, it feels it's also robbing one player on those lineups from the opportunity to play for one of the best teams within North America. Where do you fall on that?
I'm honestly not sure because I mean the solution that was put in place is that you're not supposed to leave your roster in the middle of the season, right? Otherwise you're like banned for 6 months. But like obviously if a player just decides they don't want to play HOTS anymore, that's something that I don't think that Blizzard expected this to happen so frequently that it's a repeating issue. So I'm honestly not sure what they can do to combat it. I mean, personally, I think maybe something that could be explored in the future is allowing more fluid roster changes in terms of not locking it to a specific period. Where it's kind of crazy in terms of like the short amount of time period you have to actually decide your five-man for a whole 4 month period, because a lot of teams they only have like 1 or 2 weeks to commence tryouts, and then a lot of teams, even if they're coming back from an event, may even have less time than that. So I think maybe opening up roster changes throughout the season could be something worth doing, and seeing if that might make the talent pool more fluid overall.
Would you open up those roster changes within HGC or only
Yeah, throughout the entire league, yeah.
So that you can actually, as an HGC team that wants to find a new player, you cannot only look at players outside of the HGC system within Open Division, for example, but you could take a player if he's interested from one of the other HGC teams. Always, of course, like assuming that contracts are not going to be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you still have an issue with contracts and buyouts and whatnot, but I think that might even still be a better solution, because I think an HGC team could handle it better, and they would find a replacement themselves, and maybe that player could shine rather than thrusting. To me, it just doesn't make sense that. I mean, and again, it's just really unfortunate that it was the top two team both times, but now. Looking at Heroes Heart's situation, because Arthlon left after the Crucible roster lock period, they can't even pick up a player from a top two open team. So now they're likely going to BlizzCon, and they have to pick up a player who's not in the top, not even the top 40 players in NA, but not even the top 50 players in NA. They have to pick up someone outside of that. So to me, I think it's kind of crazy that has to be the case. So I mean, I don't really know, what we could do to combat that.
I mean, we went down the rabbit hole with that topic a little bit more than I expected at the start, but I still have to throw one immediate concern that especially people within the audience would have if we would open up the roster changes outside of phases. Personally, it's an argument that I don't understand, and it's the argument of how can I cheer for a team when they change the lineup so often. Now, for me personally, that's not really an issue, since I'm mostly looking at the whole of the region and I'm following certain players or certain 2-3 mans that are staying together and the character of the team. I don't really have a problem when within the region, like some players shift over to different teams, since I get quite excited to see how those new five-mans are working out. But it's a topic or a concern or problem that has now been popping up a lot. What's your stance on that? Do you feel this is something where people need to change their perception of who they're cheering for a little bit? Or do you think that this is now, if we would open up player swaps within the season, it's a problem that needs to be remedied somewhere else because that connecting with the team seems to be an issue for a lot of fans?
I think it's definitely a legitimate concern, but I think that if that team's gonna make roster changes regardless, 2 months later, 3 months later, then is it really any better that they may be a lot worse for those 2 months that they're stuck with that roster? I think that I mean like I said, I think it's definitely a legitimate concern. But if it's gonna happen anyways, why not let the teams decide for themselves what's best? And I think you can still retain your team identity while still making small roster changes regardless. And I don't think it would be like such a crazy musical chairs where every team's switching out players every week. But I do think it could help to freshen the league up a bit, because I know that there are several rosters in the past and even in the present where they kind of feel like they have uh, conflict that can't be solved until the roster change period is over. So instead of just forcing them to stay on that roster, why not allow them to explore options? Maybe even in the open division, right? Like maybe a player is like, you know what, I'm in the HGC right now, but I think I can maybe make it in the Crucible. Why can't that player step down? Let maybe a fresh amateur player come in and maybe see what they can do, and that player maybe plays in the Crucible. But the way it is right now, if you tried that, you'd get banned for 6 months and you wouldn't be able to do it anyways. So yeah.
Right, thanks. Um, Switching topics a little bit, let's talk about the game itself. Like, are you currently happy with the state the game is in? And I mean, that can be either client-wise, feature-wise, or also like balance. Like, what are your thoughts on the development of the game, let's say over the last year? New heroes coming in, the balance changing, and of course also just like the entire infrastructure that we have within Heroes.
I'm personally, I think it's been on an upward trend in terms of a lot of the issues I had have been addressed in the past year. Whether it's the third ban system or making improvements to the GM matchmaking and things of that nature. So I think, and even the meta, I remember the double support meta of last year, HGC finals. It felt like there's no way getting out of that. I think the devs did a great job at moving us past that, and I think even now the hero diversity that we see is a lot higher than it used to be. There's obviously still like some issues, like right now, it seems like the most recent hero releases have been too powerful, and maybe we're looking at a bit of mobility creep in that aspect where, if you look at like the list, like out of the last like 10 heroes released, like 8 of them are like first pick, first ban, right? So I think there's definitely still improvements to be made, but I think definitely like that things have been on a really good trend.
Okay, I want to close this a little bit just with a question towards the end. I already asked you a bit what your parents were thinking about when you were playing within Dorm and when you invested like all that time. Where do they stand now? You said that they're in general very supportive when you set your mind on something. Is that still the case? Do they actually follow your games? Is that something where your brothers are also like talking to you about that? I just want to come back to that family aspect a little bit towards the end of this interview because I really am interested in how do they deal with that little niche world that you are in right now? Is that something they're looking into themselves? Have your brothers picked up the game a little bit to play at least to get an idea there? And how do your parents react to all of that?
Yeah, actually, all of my brothers watch my games, and especially when I go to events, they try to like sit my parents down and explain it to them, but they don't really, they're too old for that, to be honest. But yeah, no, my parents are definitely supportive, and I think a big part of it is that I am self-sufficient now. I've moved into my own place, paying all of my bills, on top of everything. So I think for them, obviously they wanted to see me continue my education and go into a more traditional field, but yeah, I think they're just happy to see me out here doing what I love, and yeah, that's about it.
Have they been at events as well?
No, they haven't gone, but maybe this BlizzCon.
All right. Also, let's talk a little bit for just a second about I mean, you talk about your parents and like supportive, but is there also an aspect to it where, with the self-sufficiency that you've been talking about, you are worried about the future? I mean, you picked up streaming as well, which is of course another avenue for you to explore. That's also very sustainable in the long run if you build something up for yourself. Does that come because you want to be also in the future self-sustainable, or is it something that you just enjoy personally?
I think it's a bit of both. I think I definitely would have a harder time justifying this as a job at the moment if I didn't have, streaming as a supplemental income. But I think in general, it just makes the game a lot more fun for me and it makes it less of a grind. I mean, I play about, what, 12 hours a day, but to me, it feels like, every day I wake up. Like when I was in school, every day I would wake up, just hating my, like, oh my God, another Monday, another, like, and I'd be like, oh, thank God it's Friday. And I kind of like thought about it, I'm like, dang, I hate 5 out of 7 days of my life. What's going on here, right? Whereas now it's like every day I wake up, I'm like, all right, let's go, time to grind. So I think overall I'm just a lot happier, and streaming has definitely been a big part of that in terms of having people interact with, having maybe that fallback in the future, or just in general making it less of a grind for sure.
Where can people actually find you? Social media and also like streaming? I mean, you have a pretty regular schedule at this point, as far as I know, right?
Yeah, I stream every day around 5 p.m. Pacific time at twitch.tv/Kure_HOTS. The weekends are a little iffy because of HGC. If I'm playing, I normally stream the same day. Maybe I'll take a day off a week, but generally like 5, 6 days a week. And then Twitter, you can find me as well, twitter.com/Kure_HOTS. And those are my two main social media platforms right now.
All right, awesome. Kyo, thank you very much for being on the interview here and taking all the time. Really appreciate it, and I hope things that go well and that we see each other on BlizzCon.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye. All right, guys, I hope that you enjoyed today's interview with Kure. And again, if you have any kind of suggestions, anyone that you would like to see me interview in the future, you can, of course, just like post it in the comment section. If you like the video and the interview series as a whole, make sure that you give the video a thumbs up. I would also appreciate it if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done that yet. And of course, if you want to support the show with coffee, then you can do that on Patreon as well. Always highly appreciated. That being said, hope that you guys have a great week, and I'm going to see you next time with the next interview here on Coffee with Khaldor.